In this video, I'm going to share with you how rendering is done in Compose Multiplatform. So we're going to start by looking at a simple iOS app which displays this hello world. This iOS app is using Compose to display the simple UI. So how is Compose included in the bundle for this iOS app? When you look at Xcode, you'll see that Compose gets compiled natively and gets incorporated as part of this bundle. And you could see the different symbols for Compose by using the names command. The names list command, when you run it on the bundle, you'll see that all the different symbols that are part of it, and you'll see Compose specific symbols like metal view and lifecycle support. When you look at how the bundle is structured, you won't see Compose related XC frameworks, because at build time, Compose is compiled natively and gets incorporated as part of the bundle. And you could see this when you look at the build phase in Xcode. There's a Gradle command that gets executed to be able to package it as part of the bundle. So when it comes to rendering, and I'm going to share with you all the different components that are part of this Compose Multiplatform Core library. So this is a fork of the Android X repo. It contains components related to window management, to Skia drawing related utilities. It contains things that are related to UI kit. So let's start by looking at different layers of how this app is structured. So in Xcode, you could look at all the different layers. You'll see that it contains not just one UI view, but many different UI views. And each layer here is responsible for playing its part in orchestrating the rendering. So at the root, you have a window, and the window has a root view controller. And underneath it, you have a lot of subviews that get added. There's one subview which is specific to Compose, and then you have something called a Compose scene, which acts as a mediator. It acts as a bridge. And then you have a metal view, which is doing drawing and redrawing, which we'll look at. So let's start from the top and look at how this works. Where is this root view controller getting added? It's added in the app delegate. The app delegate, what it's doing is that it's setting up a window, and then it's setting up the root view controller. So when you look at UI kit main, you'll see inside I'm using something called Compose UI controller, view controller. So this is something which is provided by the Compose Multiplatform library. It takes in two parameters. First parameter that it takes in is the ability to configure the UI, to make it opaque, to make the background opaque. It also takes in a second parameter, which is a content, and that's a composable. So you can specify in this lambda all of your Compose UI things. So I'm using a box and a text here with modifiers. Internally, Compose UI view controller has to take this composable content and then to bubble it down to different layers like Compose scene. And we'll look at how that works. So when this app gets built and it shows you in a simulator how it's a hello world, you could debug it and you could look at the different layers. And each of these layers has a specific responsibility. So at the root, you have UI window scene. Then as you saw, a view controller. So what is that view controller doing? It's adding in a subview called a Compose view. So when you think about a view controller, there are specific methods I could override to hook into the lifecycle, like view did load, or for example, add view. So this will create a UI view called Compose view, which takes in the whole bounds of the screen. And it adds it in the load view method that I'm overriding, which is part of the view controller. And over here, I'm specifying this UI view to be the root. So what Compose view does, now you could see that Compose view is added as a subview of this view controller. What Compose view does underneath the hood is that it creates something called a metal view, where it's going to add it as a subview. This is where all the drawing happens using a library called Skia. This is where the surface gets drawn on. So what the metal view does is that metal view is a UI view, and a UI view allows me to get access to a layer. And I could use that layer. What this component does is that it uses that layer and converts it, casts it to a type called CA metal layer. And what I could do with this layer is use it for drawing different things. And all of the commands for drawing into this layer are recorded using Skia and all of the different draw commands. So metal view, what it does is that it provides a layer to something called a metal redrawer. Metal view internally creates this redrawer, which does all the lower layer Skia drawing. And what the redrawer does is that it takes uses Skia and it records all the draw commands, and it creates something called a canvas. This is a Skia canvas that gets given to the metal view. The metal view takes this canvas and bubbles it up and gives it to the compose view, which we'll look at. So Seco are Kotlin multi-platform libraries for the Skia library. Skia is a library that you'll see used in Flutter, you'll see used in Compose, you'll see used in different UI libraries. And Skia is a drawing library. And this is a library, Seco, which has Kotlin multi-platform bindings. So this is used in the Kotlin multi-platform core repo, which I showed you earlier. So the layer, what it does underneath the hood, what metal view does, that metal redrawer does, is that it creates something called a picture recorder. The picture recorder is part of the Skia drawing library, and it records all the different draw commands one by one by one, and it records them and creates something called a picture, which gives that to the surface to draw. So it begins recording whenever there needs to be a draw. When you begin recording, you get a Skia canvas. This Skia canvas is given to the render method. What this render method does is that it takes that canvas and it bubbles it up to the compose view. And we'll look at how that happens. So that's what this render method is doing. So the metal redrawer takes that canvas and gives it to compose, the Skia canvas. So then you finish recording. So right now you haven't execute any draw commands, you've just recorded all of them. What you get back from this draw command is a picture that you're providing to the surface, to a Skia surface. So you take this picture and then you construct the surface in Skia, and then you use the canvas to draw the picture. This is where the actual drawing is happening. Whenever there's a redraw that's needed, this is what gets executed. So this is what's happening underneath the hood in that metal view. This is what the purpose of that is. So whenever there is a new frame, you could think of it as a clock. Whenever there's a tick in this clock, there is a new frame that's given to you. Think of this film reel, which has different frames. And whenever there's a new frame that needs to be drawn, there's this draw method that gets called, and what's that draw method is doing is this picture recording and a surface drawing, which is what I showed you. And you could look at the instrument logs underneath the hood to see what's happening. So when this app starts up to draw, these are all the different commands. In that iOS app, there is a way with Compose Multiplatform to be able to turn on trace logs. And you can look at them in Xcode in the instrument logging panel. So you'll see in here that there are logs at the top related to specifically to Compose. But then you'll see what happens underneath the hood, which is what I just showed you, which is what the metal redrawer is doing. You see picture recording happening there. So you'll see the metal view is doing its job. That's what the purpose is in that layered stack. And now we're going to look at what happens on the top, which is all the compose commands. So you have your UI window scene just as a review. And we looked at what the view controller does. It adds a compose view. And also has this bridge we'll look at, compose scene. And we looked at also what metal view is doing. Is using Skia to do all of the picture rendering. And it gives the canvas up. So it provides and bubbles up that canvas from the bottom to the top. Now keep in mind, when we started this, we looked at how I set up in the app delegate the view controller. I provided to it a compose UI structure hierarchy. It has to bubble that down all the way down to compose view and bubble that down to compose scene mediator view. And that's what we'll look at next. So when you look at the instrument logs, what we'll look at is what's happening in that compose view layer. What's happening on that layer? You'll see a specific rendering that's happening. You'll see scheduling, which is happening. You'll see that as the instrument logs, which is on top of this metal redrawing logs. So metal view, what it does is that it creates a bridge with compose. It provides a surface to the compose view. It bubbles that to the top. So this is the compose UI view, UI hierarchy that I want to print. I have the simple hello world with modifiers. What I'm doing here is that I'm providing this to compose UI view controller, and it has to take this. And what it does is that it takes this content, which is a composable, and it provides it to compose scene. And then it takes that and it provides it to the compose scene view. And then it takes that and provides it to something called a root node owner. So what it's doing here is that you'll see that in this compose scene mediator, you'll see composition locales being set up. You'll see all the different setup that's happening that's related to compose there. And right at the bottom where that root node owner is, that's where the composition object and the compose runtime is set up. So when you look at, if you were to traverse down what's happening, you'll see in the root node owner, when the set content method is called, this is the entry point into compose. Well, you'll see the composition object being set up. This is where the compose runtime is set up. And you'll see that I'm giving a default UI applier in this case. And then I'm calling set content in there. And you see that I'm providing, setting up locales and providing that content. So when UI view controller, compose UI view controller gets set up, it bubbles down that content all the way down to this setup right here. This is where the compose runtime is set up. So you'll see that this is where set content is called. So when you look at the picture recorder, it's creating that canvas and it's taking that canvas and bubbling it up to the layer above, which is compose. And this is a Skia canvas that the metal redrawer is providing. You see that metal redrawer is calling this render method, and the render method provides the canvas upwards. So the way that works, and we'll look at now what compose scene does, is that it takes the canvas and then it performs the different phases that it needs for compose. One is the layout, and then it sets up the snapshots there, and then it draws drawing in there, and then it draws in the actual canvas. Now when this canvas, when it's provided upwards from the metal view, it's a Skia canvas, but it gets translated into a compose canvas along the way, which is what we'll look at. So the compose scene mediator is creating this metal view. So this compose scene mediator is creating this metal view, and that's the render method that's being called, and that's right there is the Skia canvas, and it's providing this to the compose scene mediator. And you can see right there it's converting that Skia canvas to a compose canvas for drawing. So you could see that the metal view is orchestrating with this compose scene bridge, and this is where one of the bridging is happening, and this is all specified in the compose scene hosting view controller, which is right there. So these layers are working together with each other to make drawing happening, and you could look at the instrument logs in order to understand what each of the different drawing commands mean. And I hope that was helpful. And so each of these different layers have specific responsibilities, and you could view all of them in the Compose Multiplatform library.